I'm Jamie Hyneman, and I'm here as an ex-MythBuster. We stopped shooting MythBusters in November of last year, but apparently we've done enough work on television that I'm still quite famous and people want to see me. So I'm down here at Faire because I'm kind of an Uber maker, as it were, with all the stuff that I've built over the years, and I'm going to talk to people about what that's like, since that's what Faire is all about. What are all you people doing here?
They're here to see me. Well, I was the backup plan. Had your flight not been, well, I was going to say smooth. It wasn't. It was going to be me and my prowess with Lincoln logs that were going to keep the attention of everybody here. But since you're here, I guess we'll do this.
Yeah. Okay.
Jamie Hyneman, everybody, I know you're here for one reason, and it certainly is not me. Go ahead, have a seat, and kind of take folks through a little bit of, the world of Jamie Hyneman.
Well, let's see. We finished shooting MythBusters in November of last year, and I'm really happy that the whole thing happened, that we were able to do all the weird stuff that we did and get it on television. But I'm relieved. I mean, people ask me how I feel now that the show's gone, and I generally say I feel like I had a bad rash for 14 years that I just got rid of. Having a film crew kind of following you around and messing with everything you're doing all the time is the thing with me. I mean, Adam loves that kind of stuff, but with me, I'm actually interested in what we were doing. And
he's in the back.
and so I was trying to focus on stuff, and so all the while, everything that you saw, we've got like, a bunch of camera people that are in my shop taking things out of my drawers and putting them in other drawers where I don't know they are, and it generally was chaos, but we survived, and it's all good now. So a little bit of background. Just a brief view of my life. I grew up on a farm in Indiana on an apple orchard. My mother was a librarian, and my father was a fruit grower, and I worked on the farm quite a bit. I bought a pet store when I got out of high school. I ran that for a few years, decided it was actually hard, making a living in retail, and decided to go to school, and for some reason I got a degree in Russian linguistics. I did that and then decided to take a vacation, and I'd always wanted to learn how to sail on an ocean. I'd sailed on little sailboats on lakes in the Midwest, but I wanted to go out on the sea, learn what that was like. So I went to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and 2 weeks after I was there, I had my own boat. 6 months later, I had my captain's license, my dive master's rating, and I ran a charter business for 4 years there, then. Having gotten tired of the routine of taking tourists back and forth, I decided to sail back up to the States with my wife, who worked with me on the boat. She was a dive instructor, and thought carefully about what I wanted to do for a living. And so I studied it, and it's kind of a weird thing. People choose careers for a variety of reasons, but it often is not a direct result of like, who am I, what appeals to me, what am I good at, what would be the best thing for me, and get real methodical about it. Like, it's an important decision, one of the most important decisions about your life. And a lot of times it's just like, well, I was working for my uncle, and he gave me a job, and I've been doing that ever since, or something like that. I, at that point, had done enough things that I knew that that it just made sense to me that I should study myself. So I made lists. I spent a lot of time at the library, and I researched it. I thought very carefully about it, and what I came up with was special effects, because I had grown tired of the routine of taking tourists out, even though I did understand that it was possible to have a job that was really fun. And so, what was really fun for me, what was not a routine, I wanted something that was creative but also practical, and I made a list of all these things, and so special effects was an ideal choice. I was very hands-on. I got I would be making things, I'd be working with a variety of materials and processes, a variety of people, and whatever I made with those things, or whatever I made would end up being used in ways that would reach lots of people in a movie or a commercial or something. And so I methodically went about getting myself a job in the special effects industry. And I did that for like 25 years or so before MythBusters came along. And at that time, that was for about 15 years ago now. And as it happened, when I started doing special effects, it was right after Star Wars and all that was happening in San Francisco, which is where we shot the show and where I live now. And there was a lot of activity in the special effects and filmmaking industry there at that time. Now it's all gone, and it's all digital. And but fortunately, right about the time that really started to take that turn, I got this call from a producer, an Australian producer, who had interviewed me some years before because I competed in Robot Wars, and I'd made this robot that was just extraordinarily destructive. It was it was called Blendo, and I would drive Blendo out into the arena. The opponent would drive out. The opponent would explode. And then they'd ask me to leave because fears of shrapnel hitting the audience, and this happened a couple of years in a row, and as a result, I became kind of notorious, and so and I'd show up to these events and just because it was fun, I'd be there like with a file sharpening Blendo's blades. I'd find out who I was going up against next, and I'd just stare at him and grin, and it actually worked. They'd start to shake, and so they got all excited. Anyway, like I said, I was notorious, and this documentary filmmaker at that time was covering this new sport. And some years later, he would have the idea to do a show about urban legends that would become MythBusters. And his concept was simply that he knew that effects guys like me, our job is to make anything that a director or a producer can come up with. And so he figured that putting me as a host in a documentary type show would liven things up and provide a context, because we build and actually replicate these things about urban legends. And so I pretty much am who I seem to be. I'm not exactly a television host kind of a person. I'm intrepid is the thing, and I'll try. I'm not afraid to get into anything. But I knew, like, I'm just not a chatty kind of a guy. And so I called up Adam, who was an employee of mine and a lot more of a ham than I am. And I asked him if he wanted to do a demo tape to see whether this would happen, and it did. So that's kind of the story of my life. At this point, I'm no longer doing filmmaking. I've had enough, and I'm ending up working for. I'm doing a lot of work for the Navy. I've got. I'm actually designed and start building a ship for the Navy in November. I'm doing a bunch of other interesting things like that. Things like putting circular saws on drones to trim trees with, so it's I've got the shop that MythBusters was in is now all the filmmaking stuff is gone, one of my favorite projects, I have a tank in there now that I'm converting to remote control.
For sure.
So anyway.
Life and Times, Jamie Hyneman.
Yeah.
A remote controlled tank, that's a good idea?
Well, this is actually, okay, this is an interesting story. This doesn't have a gun on it. It's made from, what it actually is a variation on an M113 armored personnel carrier. And so this is a thing that soldiers would drive, up to some battlefront, and it's tank treaded and moves like a tank. It's quite fast. They go about 40 miles an hour. And what I'm doing, that's my attempt at dealing with some of these fires that we're having in the West. I'm putting a 1,000-gallon water tank in the back of it, remote-controlled sprayers and things on it, and so this is intended to keep firefighters at a safe distance from a fire. I've been working with CAL FIRE and and the California Governor's Office Emergency Services Director and others, and the fires that we had out there last year were jumping 1.5 miles just from the heat. And so there's not a lot that you can do with a thing like that, and you pretty much just have to leave and let it do what it's going to do. These things would be the fun thing about this robot that I'm building is that this is a robot that we're using the tank of water as a heat sink. Water has a tremendous ability to absorb heat, and so the entire interior of this robot is a rainstorm that is running through a heat exchanger in that tank of water. The tank of water is to spray on fire to put it out, but until it gets empty, we're using it as a heat sink. So instead of melting from the heat, this thing has got everything in it is hosed down constantly. So it's a robot with a rainstorm inside. And so we should be able to actually go into a fire and stay there for at least a limited period of time. Things like eventually those fires, for example, run into a neighborhood, and firefighters just have to walk away. They can't do anything. So, and we're changing resources as far as access to reservoirs for those planes that scoop up water and drop it down. Those are getting thinned out. They're not as available as they were. This is a more surgical thing. We can put a line of these around a neighborhood and create a safe bubble while the fire does its thing and kind of goes on by, if that's all we can do. We may even find that I have larger plans because there were hundreds of thousands of those devices made, and we may be able to put them at strategic locations at National Guard outposts and that kind of thing. And so something like this happens, you can maybe have a mobile fire break that moves along with the fire and as it changes and adapts. And I call that it's kind of like catching a big fish with light tackle. You don't want to do it all at once or you're going to lose. It's just another example. I mean, we're here at the Maker Faire. These things that I'm playing around with are just, I've got the tools. I can build anything. Add time, and there you go. It's a wonderful feeling. I think having kids make things helps them internalize the kinds of things they see. If you go to school and everything's on paper and you don't have hands-on, you don't get a chance to actually do something and fail at it and then try again and eventually succeed. You don't really have the same kind of understanding that you do when you actually get a chance to do that. And that's what making is about. It's more than just so you know how to make a few things and tinker. It's a mindset, like a curiosity and more importantly, a sort of active participation in creativity. It's not passive if you make things. It's active. You're a part of it. You're actually you're creating things. It's great. I just crank the music up and bear down and walk out with something that didn't exist before that can, maybe save lives.
From TV star to hero maker.
Yeah.
Not bad. Jamie Hyneman. I know there's a lot of folks out there that probably have some questions for Jamie. We're gonna see if we can do that in a little bit. What they did prior to this show was kind of did some crowd surfing and came up with some questions. And I showed Jamie a list earlier. It's not the real list.
Good.
No, it's actually the real list. I don't want to deal with the drone with the blade on it. I don't want to run into that one. So these questions, I kind of crowd surf, so we're kind of. Yeah, we just kind of touched a little bit on how MythBusters came about. I think we saw you put us there and kind of how it began, the conversations that you were having, and then obviously, like you said, bringing in the big ham with Adam. That was kind of how the whole program got started. So I think we could probably skip that one. But
well, actually, there's something I want to say about that that's really important. I did it just for the reasons that I described. I was like, I'm like this. I kind of talk in a monotone. I'm not exactly an animated sort of a person. So I thought maybe I got somebody that was different, and we could bat it back and forth, and together we could pull it off. Now. That's where it started, but there's a lot to that we found out after we got into it, because the fact that we have very different personalities means that we see things from very different ways. And it turns out that that's actually a powerful tool for problem solving. Because, if you think of, if it's just one person looking through his particular lens, it's kind of linear. He's going down a road, and what happens if he runs into a speed bump? He's got no choice. He can't go around. There's no other way around it. With two guys or two people that are seeing things from different points of view, and there's always this. And with us, there was always this tug of war, this kind of mind meld of our different points of view. We never had that. We never ran into those speed bumps when we were moving through problems. As irritating as it was to work with each other, somehow solutions just presented themselves and through that turmoil. And not only that, I think it served to explain things to the audience a little better as well, because they're seeing things, it serves to kind of tease apart the relevant elements. So, it's kind of a lesson as far as people that are working together, that, diversity in all sorts of ways, in your mindset and in your personality or whatever, is something that it can be a real problem if people don't respect it. And fortunately, Adam and I had the wherewithal. We've known each other for 25 years, but we never once have had dinner alone together. But we respected the value of what of that relationship and what it did for us on the television, and we stuck with it. And but people at large, if you're in the workplace, it's like as not you're going to be working with somebody that you don't like, or that doesn't see things the way that you do. That can actually be a real strength.
You're absolutely right. A room full of myopic views is not going to lead to much creativity, and what we saw from you guys for 14 seasons was nothing but creativity. I'm curious, with everything that you guys did, and these are some of the questions that we kind of crowd-surfed a little bit, was there a project that you worked on, and I'm sure there's many, where nothing seemed to go right? And mentally, how did you approach that kind of project and stop yourself from getting depressed or angry with the failures? Because obviously those are teachable moments, but I'm sure you had many projects. I'm sure most of the projects didn't go right initially.
Well, one of our catchphrases, which is actually a lot more than a catchphrase, is failure is always an option. The only thing that we couldn't have on the show was, gee, I just I don't know what happened there. I don't have anything to say about it. That doesn't work for TV. It's like, sorry, you can't, have an audience watching for an hour and then say, well, what?
What's on next?
But failure is actually, we had the luxury of going like, well, we screwed up. Maybe we'll revisit it later on another episode and try it again, or it failed because that's what the nature of the thing was. It just it's not possible. The myth was that something had happened and it didn't. I think along with that is the fact that and our attitude as having integrity as far as the love of this exploration, this adventure that we were in, was that failure is a good day. Failure means that something happened that I wasn't able to deal with, and so I'm going to ask why. And if I ask why, then I may, and I figure that out, that I did something wrong or I failed, and I understand why, I've moved ahead. I've improved myself. And on the other hand, if I've done something and everything worked the way it was supposed to, it's like, for me, it's like, what's the point? Why did I waste my time with this? Because I knew exactly what I was doing and it worked. You can pat yourself on the back if that makes you feel good, but you didn't learn anything in the process. And for us, that was what it was all about. These things, some people have adventures that are, climbing mountains or whatever. But for us, an adventure is trying to do something and see things that you didn't see before, to learn things and move ahead. That's it's like you don't climb that mountain because the view's so great at the top. You climb it to stretch yourself and to experience things that you didn't experience before, or that kind of thing. So failure's great.
I try to tell my kids that all the time. They sing the show. Sorry. My show, sorry. Nothing but failures. One of the things, and we just saw a reel, all the explosions, and man, you guys are good at it. And you learned very quickly that safety was going to be paramount. And you didn't, when you walked in here, you weren't limping. So I'm curious, best injury from MythBusters?
There was one injury that happened repeatedly that was the worst one, and oddly enough, it was a result of handling our safety equipment. Those blast panels that we were lugging around, they weigh close to a couple 100 pounds, and if you get your finger in between them when you're stacking them and stuff like that, your finger's going to lose. And so Adam was the last one. We've had 4 fingers broken by our safety equipment.
Insurance is probably a real interesting conversation at that point. Safety equipment doing what?
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing about the insurance. Insurance, their job is to assess risk. And in the early days when we were starting to do the show, the stuff that we were doing was so off the charts as far as there's not a book that says you can't do this, or if you do this, this is going to be dangerous. I mean, we're like putting gasoline in toilets and setting it off. It's like, where does it say that's going to raise your insurance rates? Fortunately, we survived through that period, and as we were doing that, we learned, and we started to, whenever something did come close to hurting somebody, we would pay careful attention, take notes, and develop strategies for dealing with it. And then at a certain point, having survived that much stuff, the insurance companies simply look at it like, well, they've survived this long, so there must not be that much of a risk. And And that's pretty much the gist of it. You know, a lot of people ask, what's the riskiest or closest call you've had? Well, in one of those early days, there was a story about a tree cannon that some Hungarians made. And, you know, they bored a hole in a tree and put a stone cannonball on it, and they were going to, you know, save their tribe or whatever from the invading hordes. And as it turned out, the myth said that they fired this thing and it just blew up like a bomb and killed all of them. And, you know, and so we built this, and we took it out to Alameda, and I carved a nifty little granite cannonball and put it in there, and it worked amazingly well. We never did find that. I wanted that cannonball. I worked hard on that, but I think it's somewhere in San Francisco Bay. You know, so that was one of the first times that we really got intimate with this, one of what would become our standard shtick, which was that, well, if it didn't happen the way the myth said it happened, we need to figure out how to make that happen. And so what you normally do on a film set with, you know, things that go boom or burn is you hire a pyrotechnician. And so these are film guys that mainly work with black powder, and, you know, they'll do things like you know, make a tape ball of it, like out of duct tape or something like that, and put a fuse in it, and it makes a big bang, and it looks good. It doesn't generally do a whole lot of damage if it's handled right. So this guy was licensed to handle a certain amount of black powder, and that's what he had with him. We said, you know, so how much powder can we put in this thing? He said, well, I'm licensed to blow up 5 pounds maximum at a time. And so well, you got 5 pounds? And he said, yeah, well, put it all in the cannon. And, you know, and then I you know, got this aluminum chunk of metal, this plug, and I put it in the end of the cannon, and I'm like hammering it, which I learned later is not really a good idea. So we put a fuse into it, and we asked him, well, where should we be? And this was one of the first times we really, yeah. Well, he says, like, oh, I'm going to be 250 feet over that way. And I said, so we said, well, okay, we'll be 350 feet over that way. And that thing went off, and this was the log, the cannon itself weighed about 400 pounds. We had like 6x6 chunks of wood that were, you know, that we made kind of a framework out of to hold it and aim it, and so those chunks of wood were maybe 100 pounds apiece or something like that, and when that thing went off, these 175, 50-pound chunks of wood went over all of our heads, just and the pyro is like, whoa, dude. You know, we looked at that. That was the last time we used a pyrotechnician. You know, from then on, we worked with the bomb squad, and there was another interesting thing that kind of went in tandem with that, in which. And this is all, it's funny, but this is actually how this evolved and how we have managed to keep ourselves safe, was that, you know, we look at these things and it was like, well, what are we going to do with that? We start to push on it to figure out what the best approach is. There was one other thing that happened concurrently with that, which was that we were noticing that a lot of the stuff that we wanted to do, you couldn't get a permit to do. I mean, you just can't. You know, like you can't. It's like, I want a grenade. I want to blow up a grenade. Can I get a? No. It's like, can I get a permit for it? No. You know, you just can't get permits. So But we found that there was a loophole in the law that says that for research and evidentiary purposes, law enforcement has to be able to possess things that you can't get permits for. And so we reasoned that if we wanted to do something illegal, we needed to get law enforcement. And so as long as they were present, then we could do whatever we wanted to. And that's generally how it worked. And so if you're talking explosives, the appropriate law enforcement is the bomb squad. And those guys aren't like, whoa, dude, they're a little different kind of cut. And we, as a result of 14 years of working with them, on the other hand, the Alameda County Sheriff's Department Bomb Squad is one of the best trained bomb squads in the United States. I mean, we have done thousands of explosions, and there's another little kind of interesting thing goes along with that, and that is that you learn a lot more. This failure thing that I talked about, it goes along with seeing what happens when things don't work the way they're supposed to. And you learn a lot more about the way things work, the way the world works, when you see things that are taken outside the comfort zone. If you read it in a book and it says this is the way it's supposed to be done, that's interesting. But the depth of knowledge that you have when you worked with it and seen when it's been stretched out of its the way it's supposed to be dealt with is a whole different thing. So we and the bomb squad have had a tremendous education by all these weird things that were our stock and trade to explore.
Yeah, ideally you don't want the bomb to go off. I'm sure there's some lessons learned when it does. I'm sure you've been to so many different maker fairs kind of like this. You've seen all the stuff out there. It really is pretty impressive. And you've got all the tools like in your shop.
Actually, I have to say I haven't been, because I can't go out into a place like this. Or like it's like, it just is dangerous.
Yeah. Like you said, you learn from failure. You never want to never do it again.
Yeah, I can't move. I get mobbed.
You do have all those tools back in the shop that would make anybody here jealous. If you were to pick, say you're just kind of getting started, and you got that very limited budget, like a childhood budget, what kind of equipment would you be buying first? That, those 3D printers are becoming more and more common, but they are ridiculously expensive at the high end. If you're trying to set something up for yourself, what's the first kind of equipment you'd be buying as a new maker?
The most basic tools, like hammers and saws and chisels and things that you can get in any hardware store, because it's like I had just a little side note, I have an intern at the shop right now that came in, and he's a really bright kid, and he's doing stuff. He had interned with a drone company, and he can program, and it's amazing what this guy can do, and he's like 19 years old. And he came in, and I have a CNC machine that I haven't used for a while, and I asked him, I said, well, I've got these projects that I want you to work on, but pick something that you'd like to if you want, feel free to say, I want to get into this and learn about this, or do something. He said, well, I want to use the CNC. This is a computer-controlled milling machine for shaping metal and things like that. And I said, okay. And so he opened the thing up, and he figured out how to turn it on, and he's reading the book, and it's all good. But then I sort of found out by accident that he had never machined anything before. And I'm like, so you haven't handled a knee mill or a lathe or anything? No. And so that's where you need to start before you go. If you're going to, there's a lot of these fancy tools. Like a 3D printer, you can kind of bypass all that stuff because it is its own sort of a thing. If you learn the programming, you can make it work. But I'm a big believer in having a very broad foundation, starting at the ground level, with basic functionality. A sharp stick, is like, there's an awful lot you can do with a sharp stick, and you're jumping right to these high-end, computerized machines before you really know what you can do with a hammer and a nail or a chisel. It just doesn't make any sense. And it's not just me being an old fuddy-duddy. The thing about that is, and from what I've seen in my life, from all the hundreds or thousands of projects that I've managed or dealt with myself, is that if you have that foundation, it allows you eventually to extrapolate answers or solutions to problems that you have no direct experience with. This thing that I talked about, the linearity, if you only know one thing, sooner or later you're going to run into a speed bump and you're going to stop. And you can't do anything about it. If you have the broad foundation of knowledge, it provides, what it does is it provides a context for you to deal with new things. These things, if you're building the things that you invent, they don't exist in a vacuum. You need to have a context of knowledge so that you can find purchase on how to approach a problem. It's literally something like, I look at it like leverage. In fact, I've been asked to explain our process because it was so well known, all this stuff, crazy stuff that we got into. And the best way I can describe it is that I started to think of it in the most basic terms, and I call it pushing. If you, say there's a refrigerator in the middle of the room and you need to move it. You don't know whether it's too heavy for you, you don't know whether the floor is too grabby and you can't slide it, or what do you do? Well, you go up and you start to push on it. Maybe you push on it here, it doesn't move. You push on it there, it doesn't move. Maybe you grab the corner and you try and twist it, and you start to, what you're doing is starting to build a context of understanding of what's around that, what you're dealing with, and what it means to you. And pretty soon you find the only way you can move it is you're spinning it across the floor. I approach problems that same way, and I'll take on anything, things that I have no experience with whatsoever, and I go in and I start to push, and I start to try and apply. And what I'm doing is that pile of stuff of several decades of experience with messing with all these crazy things. It gives me purchase for my feet to grab onto in my brain to apply leverage and start to move things. And I've found I started to notice this weird thing with MythBusters. We would come in, we're working like rapid fire because we have this schedule that we're week after week. We have a certain amount of stuff that we had to produce. And I was like, we're going to have to do this with this thing. Well, what? I don't know what that, I've never seen that thing before. I don't know how, we get into it, we start to bat it back and forth, especially with Adam and I, with this kind of tug of war, and all of a sudden something starts to move. It's just like that. It's this wonderful, amazing feeling a feeling of sort of power that you can come into something and take control of it, that something you've never seen before. It's because of that foundation. So those kids, starting out with a hammer or a screwdriver, or the best way to for me, the most successful way is we've all got access to stuff that gets thrown out, like what is it, a 8mm tape recorder or something. Take it apart, give it to the kid and take it apart and tell them to put them back together. It shows how things are, bolted together, how holes that fit and gears that mesh and all this kind of stuff, and build a context of understanding of how all the things that are out there by looking at junk. Take a car apart if you've got one. That kind of thing for me. Once you build a foundation of that, then take the leap to something like a 3D printer, and you'll be like, wow, this is a wonderful tool, and I know what it's good for and what it's not, instead of just like, oh, I can just sit here on a keyboard and out comes this thing. It's like, what good is that? I think if I were a kid coming to an event like this, I would be looking at all the gadgets and things that move. I mean, if you're building things that are like robotic and you're hacking stuff and you're making it do crazy things, it's just flat out fun.
Well, you right now probably sitting in a part of the world that has the most literal builders per capita. South Louisiana right now is surrounded by builders. Everybody's turned into a builder of their own, a maker of their own, as they kind of rebuild their lives after the flood. So I think we're in a pretty good spot. Everybody is a maker of some sort right now.
Oh, I got one other thing to add, especially since in this context. The other thing that I think it's important for people to do, and at least that's the way that I work, is read. We're in a library. Read about things and then try to apply what you read. Unless it involves explosives, of course.
Then go find a bomb.
Yeah.
Every corner.
Yeah. But that's really, I mean, it sounds like, of course you're going to say that. It sounds like, it's obvious, but it really is. If you read about something and you put it in your head, that's a passive thing. It's like, it's interesting knowledge, but it's a whole different kettle of fish when you start to apply it. That is an active application of what is in your head. And if you can't, I mean, there's value to having things in your head that you can't apply, but if you really, if you're wanting to have impact on the real world, and we all live in one, you need to have an active participation with that knowledge. And that means, the quickest way that you can get a start and the quickest way that you can accumulate a lot of information is through reading. But you need to, as much as possible, within constraints, be able to apply that. And so read it and then make it, or read it and try it.
I got 3 kids out here. Every one of you just heard that? Reading is important. Okay, it's not just dad saying this. And yeah, I'm calling out right there.
Well, and as another minor case in point on that, the one thing that Adam and I do actually have in common is that we're voracious readers. So so that my mother was a librarian. We had I grew up in a context where it was kind of a pain in the butt, actually, because I couldn't have a question at the dinner table or something about something without everything comes to a halt, where we have to go get some book and the encyclopedia and look it up. But I'm just saying.
What's an encyclopedia?
Yeah.
Right? Today's kids.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Look it up. No. I'm curious. One of my favorite questions, and this is a crowdsourcing, was one, and after the video, I think we understand where this answer is going to be. Would you rather dig into a problem and solve it with some great Rube Goldberg machine, or would you rather take the time and blow up that Rube Goldberg machine with an even better Rube Goldberg machine? Just say Bomb Squad.
Bomb Squad.
Yep. Now, when you talk about the complicated myths that you guys went after, and you and I were talking earlier, superlatives are ridiculous. After pushing 300 episodes, trying to pick one is almost ridiculous. But when you talk about some of the more complicated ones, when you said, well, this may be a few episodes, we may have to revisit these a few years from now. I'm sure there's a stick out?
You know, it's I'm not sure how to answer that. I look back at a series of I don't look at something as like the myth. I could care less about a myth. Yeah. I guess is the gist of it. You know, I'm focused on, you know, putting that bolt in the hole and tightening it down. That's I mean, honestly, that's the level that I work at. And if there's something that I find interesting, I kind of follow a scent like a dog. I often don't know where I'm going. I'm just going for it. If it's more complicated, if it's less complicated, it's all the same thing. I do, as a rule of thumb, whenever I'm doing anything, I try to get whatever it is done the simplest possible way, but I'm not afraid of doing something complicated. I've got one other project that is underway that is a good example of Jamie taking on a complicated sort of a thing that's ridiculously complicated. I've got an ATV that is being built in the shop that has a suspension system. Normal automobile suspension systems have like a wishbone and a shock, right? That's how the wheels are supported. This thing, and so a car has 4 shocks and 4 wishbones. This thing has 24 servo pneumatic pistons as suspensions on it. Have you ever seen how a flight simulator works? It's got like 6 pistons going to the thing. That gives 6 degrees of freedom. I've got 6 pistons on each wheel, so this is an ATV that can walk. It can actually moonwalk. It can jump to one side or jump forward, not like a lowrider that can just jump up and down. It's crazy.
So when the robots take over, you're positioning yourself as overlord? Is that?
Well, the fun thing about that suspension system is, like, you start to think, well, how are you going to control it? You know, a steering wheel isn't really going to cover it, right? And so we were playing around with it. We were trying there were several problems with it. Servo pneumatics, and I guess I can. This is sort of a little esoteric, geeky thing, but I think I'm entitled at a Maker Faire. Servo pneumatics are, in this case, linear actuators that have positional feedback. So they have a potentiometer in there so that they can fairly precisely determine position. Normal pneumatic actuators is give them air and they go all the way out or they go all the way in. These can be controlled just like an electric actuator, except that it's a little less precise, but it's certainly precise enough for a suspension system. The advantage is that they're much more powerful and lighter weight than like a lead screw type linear actuator or that's electrically powered or a hydraulic actuator. And so the problem is that air compresses, and normally with a hydraulic situation, you can, if you shut the valve off that is pumping the fluid, it just locks it there because fluids don't compress very much, and but air does, and so it's very springy, and so what they do is they have a PID system, which is it's a little computerized thing that is in the controller that compensates by giving more or less air if there's an error, in the position. So it actually, it takes it, and there's a little bit of a lag, but it starts, if you push on one of those things and it reads that the potentiometer is moving and you haven't told it to, you'll kind of feel this thing, depending on how you tune, kick in and start to push back to hold that position. Well, that lead time is the problem, and what we found was that because those systems normally are only talking to themselves, like the controller's talking to its piston, but when you have 6 of them, and they start to get in on the play, and they start to feel errors, maybe started by the one piston from or more. They don't know what the others are doing, and they start to get very, very upset. And so this thing goes into a feedback loop, and to put it in perspective, these are 2.5-inch diameter cylinders that at 150 psi, it's about 750 pounds of push per cylinder, and there's 6 of them. So feedback loop means 4,500 pounds of pissed off. And it's kind of fun to watch, but not for very long. And then put that on a vehicle where you've got 24 of them and they don't know what the others are doing. So between that and understanding that a steering wheel isn't really sufficient to control all these things as well, there's something that's either inherently wrong with this approach, or we have to come up with a new challenge. And what we did was we realized that we need to have a central brain that understands what it's all doing and is controlling it, not only in terms of the moves, but in terms of the feedback loops. And so one of my friends, who is the guy responsible for the animation in Jurassic Park, it's called inverse kinematic animation. He did the Metal Man in Terminator. He did the pseudopod in the Abyss, and so he's like this. He knows animation, and he was working. He likes to get his hands dirty, and so he comes down and plays with me on these crazy projects at the shop. And he. In talking with him, we decided that we needed to, for the steering wheel problem, we needed to create an animation. So he's animated this in the same kind of program that created Jurassic Park. He's animated the car to do particular moves, and so when we're driving it, we'll simply be playing an animation, which is. It's kind of like there's a cartoon that's driving my car, is cool. And the other thing to deal with the feedback loops was that same system that is sending out those moves. What we've done is we've set all of the controls. We've sent the sensitivity and response time control on the controller for these to 100%, which normally is a bad idea because that means it gets really pissed off really quickly in the feedback loop. But everything else is backed off to 0, and the computer is doing that sort of response reaction itself. So and this is another good example of what I was referring to with pushing. I've never built one of these before. Nobody's built one of these before. I know these. I never worked with servo pneumatics before. But we start to get into it, and you start to push and pry, and the fact that, again, this diversity of knowledge. Here's an animator that doesn't really know anything about 24 piston ATVs or machining or anything, and he's like, wow, we can just animate this for our steering wheel. So there's an example of something that is just, it's ridiculously complicated, but it'll do things that nothing else can do, and just because we're trying it, we're learning things about motion control and robotic systems that nobody else knows. Nobody else has done this before, as far as I know, and it may not work. If we fail, then it's a good day, because we look at all the stuff that we picked up along the way that may get applied to something down the road.
What we just learned is how Jamie's new vehicle is already out on the Baton Rouge Road right now, pissed off, stuck in the loop, nowhere else to go.
Was that too? Was that too esoteric? I mean, okay, good.
Well, there's a lot of words I didn't understand, but you're among friends here. Speaking of that, I know we've already been going on about an hour, so I thought what we might do is maybe open it up to a few lines.
Absolutely.
Right, you want to do that? We can probably get to a few. Let's see. First hand. Up, right there. Sorry first. Let me get out here with the microphone.
Hey, it's small enough. We can hear.
Come on up. Yeah, come on up. What's your question, Jake?
In one of your earlier episodes, you built a jetpack, and it didn't work. So I have two questions. First off, how disappointed were you? And second off, are you going to try to build another one?
I was very disappointed with that. And the funny thing about that one, this gives you an idea about my, I kind of was complaining about what it was like working with film people. Well, the producer at that time authorized doing that and because he figured that either it was going to work, which would make for good TV and be worth the effort, or it was going to fail catastrophically, which would make for good TV and be worth the effort. What he got was something that didn't work, but didn't fail catastrophically. And that took, normally everything that you've seen us do, we turn around in about 2 weeks, and which means that 1 week is for on location shooting and 1 week is for the building, which means that that anything that I had to take on, I had to be able to build in, like, figure out how to build it and actually make it work in about 4 to 5 days. So you can imagine building a jetpack like that in 4 to 5 days. And the producer was like, this actually, the total window of time that we ended up using on it was 3 weeks. And he didn't get any payoff for it. So that's kind of like, really, the ones that the other people that we talked to about these things that had tried to build similar objects had, had been working on them for like 4 or 5 years and spent, $6 million on them, and this guy's ticked off at me for spending 10 days, and $10,000 on it.
Sounds like a producer.
Yeah. So yeah, I was disappointed with it, and I'd love to make another one, but actually, if you're interested in those things, if you look up the Martin jetpack, there is an Australian guy that made one that is pretty much the same design that works. It has about twice the horsepower that we had. They're actually, I think they're actually, I'm not sure whether they're for sale yet, but they're pretty, if they aren't, they will be soon. With those things, I think since we did that, there's a lot of other advances that have been made. Like you've seen people on hoverboards, probably online, standing on a low platform and riding along with them. Since we did that show, multi-rotor, quadcopters and things like that have become very common, and the control systems for those are great. The electric motors, the lithium batteries. I know somebody that is a friend of mine that is out in the Santa Cruz area that has an electric multi-rotor craft that can carry, I believe, 4 people 200 miles at 200 miles an hour on a charge. So it's for me, the way that I would look at that is like, oh, why would I bother? Somebody we know it can be done. So I'm building something else crazy that I don't know whether it can be done or not. If I knew I could do it, why would I try?
Like I said, I'm hopeful that I'm around for my Jetsons jetpack, but I got Larry down the street and back into his trash can 3 times. Larry doesn't need a jetpack. I'm fearful of what's going to happen. Let's go to the right side. Question right? Yeah, let's go right here up front. It's easy on me.
What was your favorite non-MythBusters related project you've done?
Favorite non-MythBusters related project I've done? Well, Well, the ones that I'm working on now are my favorites. You know, there's I guess, let's see, the tank that I described, the firefighting vehicle, is right up there. The project that I'm working on for the Navy is a good second. This is a ship that will be 165 feet long by 48 feet wide, capable of carrying 2 million pounds on it, basically twice its own weight, at about 80 miles an hour across rough seas. And there's nothing else like it that exists. And that is, we've done, we're moving into phase 2 in November, which will be a 55-foot third scale model of it. It's, you know, it's quite something.
You say 80 miles an hour?
Yeah, yeah. Normally with ships, if you exceed your hull speed, and especially on a large ship, the power requirements become astronomical. There's a point where they either have to get up on a plane, or they're just going to make a bigger and bigger wave. And so you look at the power curve goes vertical, and it simply effectively is impossible to go faster with ships of that size. With this thing, it rides on a cushion of air like a hovercraft does, but hovercrafts have flexible skirts. They can't handle that kind of speed. They can't handle rough seas. This doesn't have a flexible skirt. It rides on air cushions. It's a specific design that we pretty well know it'll work. It's just a question of actually implementing it in a way that is practical.
Sounds like a show. I've watched them. What do you got? Right here? Go ahead. Got a question?
Have you had a chance to revisit the racing spiders?
The racing spiders. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, that was another failed project that was very educational for me, that I'm not sure. No, I have not had a chance to. I'm not sure whether I'm going to approach it again. I kind of learned what I needed to learn out of it. That one is probably worth attempting again. Since I already indulged in too much esoterica with it, with stuff, this involved using high-strength lines, which is one of my favorite things. You know, you can get these things that are like the thickness of a shoestring that will hold, you know, 1,500 pounds or so. And I was using those effectively as tendons for powering a mechanical spider. And we built a 4-footer, and it worked. There were problems with those fibers and the way that they stretched, and that were different than what I understood from the specs. And I've since found I guess the relevant answer is I found different kinds of fibers that are equally as strong but don't have these stretching issues, which were causing me problems because I couldn't get the precision that I wanted precision that would be equivalent to rods or gears. And I couldn't get that. But the point with those was that you can, and there are other people that are actually looking into this now in robotics situations, in less challenging things than spiders, and they're doing quite well with them. The end result, in answer to what he was asking about, was that I built these smaller models as a proof of concept, intending to make 20-foot diameter ones that I could ride that were powered by motorcycle engines. Using those high-strength fibers as tendons allows you to get much more speed and power than you would be any other way. Because if you have the legs basically work like oars, and at a certain point, if you have your power transmission at the root of the oar, that's a hard spot that is going to snap unless that is massively heavy and strong. And so by running these tendons out to a midpoint from different directions, then you can actually because of the incredible strength of those fibers, you can actually get them to do amazing things. And what's really interesting about that whole thing, to come full circle with it, is that that's exactly what your body has, is tendons. And this was sort of a thought experiment about reducing or substituting bending loads, like at the base of the oar, which would make it snap, for tensile and compressive loads, just like a radio tower or a boat mast does. Except nobody that I was aware of had been using that dynamically. They'd only used it statically in things like radio towers. So it was kind of an interesting thing that, and I imagine we'll see a lot more of that in some designs.
See if we can get towards the back over here a little bit. As I'm doing that, how long did it take you to get the rotten pig smell out of your nose? That myth.
It's still there.
Exactly. What we got? You got me one? Yeah, right here, right here.
Hi. You were talking about how you work on a lot of projects at once. How do you juggle them and prioritize what you're doing, or do you do them very one-track minded, like one at a time?
I'm in a habit of doing that because there are always going to be log jams in, like, you need a new you need a material that hasn't come in yet, or you haven't figured something out. So I'll focus on them one at a time, but the minute I run into a speed bump, I shift. That's kind of how that works. With some of these projects, like like the ship for the Navy and so on, those will be. Those will just, when they get into full speed, I'm going to have to focus on those, and that's actually how I work best. Is I'm like I described on some of these projects. I'm like a dog on a scent, and I just follow it. I focus really well, but I'm not good at multitasking.
The Navy doesn't want you working on pig carcass while you're working on the ship.
The thing about the pig, you mentioned that. I don't still have that in my nose, but oddly enough, there's a screwdriver that I used to go into that car to try and take it apart, to clean it, to see whether we could get the smell out of it. That screwdriver is in my drawer of screwdrivers in M5, and if you open that drawer, you can smell it. And that was like, it has to be like 12 years ago. It's amazing.
We've got time for one more being told, so let's see if we do. Young lady, how about you? Absolutely.
Do you have a favorite myth that you've done, and if so, what is it?
Yeah. Well, it's okay. The answer is I don't actually have any favorites. There's been so much that we've done, and they've been, and there are many of those things that have been really really worthwhile and interesting in their own right. The one that I like to hold up best, though, as an example of what I think we did at our best, was a story called The Lead Balloon. And we built a balloon that was made out of lead, that was 14 feet in diameter, and filled it with helium, and it flew. And what's neat about that is that, well, obviously it's a ridiculous thing. There's a very good reason they don't make balloons out of lead typically. It's very heavy and it's not very strong. And so the challenge for us was to figure out how to do that, and we rolled this stuff out. It was, or had it rolled out by a German company. It took us 2 years to find a place. We had 2 companies in the U.S. try it. They couldn't do it. Eventually, we found this German company that did. It was 0.0007 of an inch in thickness, and all folded up on the ground before it inflated. It was thinner than a human hair. And so what you have to do, what we did, and what was so interesting about it, was that it's not that hard to hold in your head. This is just a bag, right, and that you fill with a gas. This is not some 24 piston ATV design. But the material was so unforgiving that we had to know exactly and without any room for error what that material was going to do and how we were going to hold it together. And what that meant was that we had to walk through the build process. We had to design how we were going to build that bag and walk through every second of the day of the build in our heads before we actually did it, so that we could anticipate problems that we would have. And for me, that was like when we actually did this when we actually built it. I'd been there already. It was the most thrilling feeling because it was like the closest that I'll ever be to seeing the future. Because that's exactly what it was. Every little thing that, by forcing myself into that kind of mode, like bringing that into your head and building it, you know, like second by second, every step of the way, you know, I was coming up with, well, there are holes that are going to rip in it, and so how are we going to patch those? Well, the PSI load is going to be relatively low because it has to be, or we'll break the thing, but we need patches. So, okay, we'll get spray adhesive that we can spray around the hole, and we'll have pre-cut, you know, patches that we put on them. Or there were things like if we filled it from the bottom, which is typically what you would think of doing with a balloon, the layers above it would be put under pressure, and as things started to move, the thing would rip. So, well, okay, we need to fill it from the top, which we did. And things that I was visualizing, just like I was visualizing the refrigerator, for example, and looking through this, if you took a garbage bag, like given that this lead is not elastic, right? It doesn't stretch like latex. If you take a garbage bag and you pump a gas into it like helium, what's it going to do? It's not going to inflate like a balloon symmetrically. It's going to, all the gas is going to go to one corner of it and start to create a bubble that will get larger and expand from there. Well, that's a hard point, and that's going to rip a hole in it. So we understood that before going in, just in our heads from thinking it through, and we showed up with, you know, half a dozen people or so with a sheet of clear plastic that we pulled taut over it and laid it right on the ground. And so as it was inflating, it could only come up a little bit, and the plastic would form it to spread out evenly, and then we manually lifted it up. There's something like 30 different things that we saw in our heads before we, you know, before we actually started to build like that, and it was just thrilling. There's no explosions, no high-speed car crashes, no nothing. But you know, as far as our adrenaline level, seeing that actually every last one of those things, you know, work or happen, it was thrilling.
That's when Bob sort of calls you and says, "What? No, you don't need us this week." We're not going anything else. From all the MythBusters fans and all the makers here and everybody that I know you've inspired, Jamie, thank you for coming down to our little part of the world. Jamie,
thank you.